Everybody, and welcome to this side event from the IPCC on responding to Paris, the IPCC's program for the coming years. Now, the way this is going to work this evening is the chair of the IPCC, Hui-Sung Lee, will give a short statement and will then take questions. He has to leave for another event before the end of this one, so he'll speak first and take questions. Then after he's gone, we'll have short presentations from the other three speakers up here. So you have Telma next to Hui-Sung on his right. You have Telma Krug, Vice Chair of the IPCC, who chaired the Scientific Steering Committee for the scoping meeting of the Special Report on 1.5 degrees. On Hui-Sung's left, you have the new Secretary of the IPCC, Abdallah Moxit, and who will speak about some of the other things we're doing apart from producing reports over the next few years, some of the supportive work there. And on his left is Kyoto Tanabe, one of the co-chairs of the Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, who will tell you about the new methodology report that we're producing. But first of all, I'll hand the floor to Hui-Sung, and he'll speak, and then, as I say, we'll take a few questions before he has to leave. Hui-Sung.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. The IPCC's current work program can best be understood in the context of decisions taken a year ago at the COP21 when the Paris Agreement was struck. The COP then decided to invite the IPCC to prepare a special report on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius and its related emissions pathways, and to ask parties to report regularly on emissions and removals by using IPCC methodologies. This is Article 13 of the agreement, and use the latest reports of the IPCC as an input into the global stocktake. In addition, the IPCC is examining how it can align its work with the 5-yearly stocktake process, something under the discussion here at Substar also. The IPCC has responded positively to this agenda. At our session in April, we included the special report on 1.5 degrees in the list of special reports to be produced in this cycle. We held the scoping meeting in August, and at the IPCC session last month, in October, we approved the outline of global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are currently seeking nominations for authors. The deadline is the 11th December. And the special report will be delivered in 2018, just in time for the facilitative dialogue later that year at COP24. Telma will provide you with more details of this extremely important and eagerly awaited report. The April session of the IPCC also decided to update our methodologies, given the central role they play in the transparency mechanism of the Paris Agreement. We have scoped out that report and approved the outline of the 2019 refinement to the 2006 IPCC guidelines at our session last month. Again, we are seeking nominations for authors for this update with a deadline of 9 December. Kyoto Tanabe will tell you more about that. Our next comprehensive assessment, the 6th assessment report, will be finalized in 2022 with this synthesis report in time for the first global stocktake in 2023. The reason I'm very specific about these dates is that our work is very closely related to the agenda of the UNFCCC and also the Paris Agreement. As you know, the IPCC in recent years has produced this assessment every 6 to 7 years. So the panel is now examining how to align our production with the new 5-yearly rhythm of the stocktake. We intend to have the proposal in a couple of years. What else we are doing besides global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius? We will prepare 2 other special reports. One on climate change and oceans and cryosphere, and the other is on climate change, desertification, land degradation, sustainable land management, the food security, and greenhouse gas fluxes and terrestrial ecosystems. These 2 highly policy relevant special reports will be delivered in 2019. We will scope the oceans report in 3 weeks' time in Monaco, and the land issues report, if I may call it in short, in February next year. And both outlines will be submitted for approval in April, with the call for nominations for authors immediately afterwards. This list of special reports, on top of methodology update and the regular assessment, represents the most ambitious work program ever undertaken by the IPCC, and we are now working at full capacity. When we looked at special reports in April, among the many topics up for discussion was climate change and cities. Cities already house half the world's population, you may know very well, and that proportion is rising. So to give rise to many opportunities as well as challenges for mitigation and adaptation, we decided that cities would get their own special report in the next assessment cycle. So cities have a early reservation for a special report that will be done at a first step in the 7th assessment cycle. In the meantime, we will pay particular attention to this topic in AR6. We also hope to encourage research in this area by co-sponsoring a workshop on climate change and cities in 2018. With AR5 and our early assessments, we have a relatively good global picture of climate change. There are some basic scientific questions we need more information on in AR6, and we also hope to add to knowledge about our more policy-relevant local and regional levels. Generally speaking, with focus now on implementing the Paris Agreement, we will put more of an emphasis on solutions. So experts from the social sciences, economics, psychology, and so on will be called upon to help us improve our understanding of the economics of climate change, the costs and benefits of actions and inaction, and of the institutional implications of different policy options. In this context, we need to move away from the phrase business as usual. In my view, business would be very far from usual in a world of warming of 4 degrees or more. Basic climate science can also contribute to solutions, improving our understanding of the climate systems, for example, through enhanced monitoring. Better knowledge of processes and improved models contributes to solutions by strengthening disaster risk reduction, understanding potential consequences of climate action. The barriers to zero carbon society, may I say, do not arise in science. After all, we already know enough to take action on the path to a carbon-free economy. And that was one of the key messages from the science community, including our own 5th assessment report released in 2013 and 2014, and its predecessor, the 4th assessment report in 2007. Most of the barriers are economic, social, institutional, and political. We need to improve our understanding on these barriers. That said, there are significant gaps in our knowledge about the challenges and risks associated with some of the technologies that have been mentioned as contributing to a carbon-free economy. These include carbon dioxide removal, as you know that very well, afforestation, and BECCS. We do not yet know enough about the extent to which these technologies can be scaled up, and hence what their potential is. Planting forests to absorb carbon or providing energy would eventually run up against the need for land for food. Examining these questions will be another focus on our forthcoming reports. Earlier today, the WMO announced that 2006 was set to be the hottest year on record, breaking even the record heat of 2015. Of course, we look at the long-term trend rather than 1 year's data, but it confirmed it would mean that 16 out of 17 hottest years on record have been this century. So this is a reminder that climate is not standing still. The policy context has also changed. Even before the start of the COP, the Paris Agreement had come into force, crossing the ratification thresholds in record time. While we are here, major economies continue to ratify their accord. A few weeks ago, We also saw agreement on offsetting the increase in aviation emissions and the amendment to the Montreal Protocol to phase down the HFCs, which some say could say half a degree of warming. Governments have shown they are ready to act. We can no longer say that policymakers are slow in responding to the voice of science. Now it is up to the scientific community to give policymakers the robust scientific evidence they require to formulate sound climate policy. The work program I have outlined for our cycle that will do just that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hui-Sung. And now, as I said before, Dr. Lee leaves, we've got time for a couple of questions on the floor for him. So do I see any? Yeah, there. And do we have a roving mic? The microphones are just coming. So if you could stand up so the cameras can see you, say who you are, who you represent.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, why don't you just come up here and use one of these?
Right. That would be much better.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Lee. I'm a student from the Free University of Brussels in Belgium, and I was just wondering, as an economist, what do you think your background can bring to the IPCC, as it's a profile the IPCC never had before at his head? Thank you.
The economic disciplines is one of the disciplines that has been contributing to the IPCC work ever since the inception of IPCC. And especially from the second assessment report, the contribution from the social science, especially the economic disciplines, has been quite, should I say, prevalent. And that tradition continued up to the fifth assessment. Therefore, my background of economics will contribute more, building on the IPCC has achieved in providing a comprehensive understanding of climate science, impacts, vulnerabilities, and the response measures. Especially when we consider the Paris Agreement, which emphasizes, which will focus on the implementation. We believe that the close collaboration between the natural and the social sciences will be in demand more than ever before. And we expect that our upcoming assessment will give a very solid scientific understanding about the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We all hope that that implementation will also be science-based.
Thank you. And there was a question here. Is that microphone working?
Is it working? Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Stefan Kalbekken from CICERO, Center for Climate Research in Oslo. So thank you, Mr. Lee, for your presentation. During the last few years since AR5, there has been quite a few papers criticizing the heavy reliance of and the assumptions in integrated assessment models. I'm thinking in particular of unrealistic assumptions in mitigation pathways, such as the global carbon price from 2020. And I appreciate that you mentioned social, economic, and institutional barriers to climate action in your intervention. And of course, I also know that you can only do your assessments based on existing research. But does the IPCC have any strategy to try to ensure more realistic mitigation pathways and assessments in AR6, either by trying to stimulate research on these topics or in how you handle those issues in the reports themselves? Thank you.
In AR5, you may have noticed that there is a great deal of effort to look into the second best solutions. And it is a part of the approaches to give the full understanding of the scientific underpinnings to the decision-making process. Now, we believe that this science of the integrated assessment models has been advancing, and that this upcoming assessment will clearly take a look at what has been learned throughout this the comprehensive assessment. And you mentioned some limitations existing for the integrated assessment. That's the state of the art. And IPCC assessment is looking into the horizon of our knowledge, and those horizons are continually expanding. And we believe that the improved understanding, for instance, improved understanding on the damage function will greatly enrich our scientific understanding of the integral nature of these climate problems from nature and also human systems complexities. So we are very hopeful in looking into how advanced our knowledge has been with regard to this integrated assessment model. They are a group of scientists working very hard, and we look forward to working with them.
Thank you. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. My name is Don Brown. I'm professor of law at Widener University in Pennsylvania in the United States, and I was the contributing author to the new chapter on equity, which I congratulate IPCC for finally bringing a more rigorous look on things that limit economic reasoning about the problem facing the world. My research tells us countries want to make decisions based upon economic self-interest and not global responsibility or equity. The question I have to you, I would hope that we expand upon the ethics and equity chapter in the fifth assessment. There's lots of things that can be said that don't create controversy, that examine the limits of economic reasoning. For instance, cost-benefit analysis that a country decides to put a value on someone else's life is deeply ethically problematic. I think IPCC, the one place it's been weak, it's a great institution, I love it, but it's really been weak on ethics and justice and equity. And how can we get in the scoping process a wider, deeper, but non-controversial look at ethics and justice?
I believe that those are the kinds of areas that the IPCC needs to give much closer look. And as you mentioned, the scoping, next May, we will have a scoping meeting for the entire AR6. And I have emphasized on many occasions the importance of the scoping process. And I clearly believe that the way the scoping participants design this product that we will produce clearly have the implication for ethics and justice. And as you may mention, this is the area that the scientists, especially in the humanities and other related scientists, gave a much closer look with regard to the integral nature of the interaction between human system and the natural system. And we need to give much more closer look and much more emphasis on this point.
Thank you. Last question before Dr. Lee departs on the agenda.
Christian Breyer, Lappeenranta University of Technology and Energy Watch Group. I want to continue with the question we had before on the integrated assessment models. First of all, when we look in the last assessment report, we do not find a really well description of energy systems. So that need to be done in the next assessment report much better, because we know the large majority of all greenhouse gases really origin from the energy system, and that needs to be done much better. And then I'm really surprised when you see with the integrated assessment models, the latest publications within the last 2 years, which of course have been not yet included in the last assessment report, but what they do for assumptions for renewables, it's outcrying outdated. They have partly, you see publications with cost for solar photovoltaics in the year 2050, which are already today lower in India. So it's obvious that we need to have an update there and really to encourage the community from the working group 3 to do the update, that we have really realistic scenarios, because we have even scientific, peer-reviewed scientific papers claiming that without nuclear or without CCS, it cannot be done, but it's based on really outdated cost assumptions for renewables. And I hope that we see much more realistic scenarios also in this point of view. And of course, scenarios which really reflect the intermittency of solar and wind. Because in a kind of a high temporal resolution, these integrated assessment models are not yet designed. So maybe we get also kind of methodological progress here in the models.
With regard to the energy enhancement treatment of energy sector, I slightly take a different view. In AR5 working group 3 report has a very extensive discussions about the energy technologies in each final consumption, final energy use sectors. And also it has a very detailed descriptions about the energy supply technologies. So my evaluation of handling the energy sector is slightly different from the way you have described. With regard to the renewables, I agree that I believe we had, since the IPCC produced the SREN, renewable special report, a lot of things have happened. And we do have tons of materials to assess. And I'm quite sure that the working group 3, led by our very able co-chairs, Jim Ski and Professor Shukla, will give a very close look at of this ever advancing frontiers of these renewable energy technologies, as well as renewable energy policy area. With regard to the IAM, as I said before, the community out there is working very hard, and there are many things they have to advance in terms of giving the world a better understanding of this complexity of the climate change problems. And as I said before, the improved understanding of the damage function, we have seen some improvement in the interpretation of data and models. And we believe that there will be a very interesting treatment of the damage functions, for instance, damage functions in the upcoming the AR6. In fact, what damage function says will tell us a great deal about the benefit side of the climate action, just to give you an example. So with that, I believe that your questions about the energy sector, renewable energy, and IAM, the issues will be in very good hand, I believe.
Thank you, Vincent. I think you probably need to go down to your next.
Just okay. Just there's one last question.
Sure,
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll go.
Yeah, thank you,
Right.
sir. My name is Chi Min-peng from National Taiwan University. I'm also Open Data Alliance in Asia. I'm wondering, because in AR4 and AR5, sometimes we can, before you announce the report, we can get the leak version. Some of the professors, some of the reviewer do not agree the small circle review process. So I'm wondering, what's the difference between AR6, between AR4 and AR5? Because 5 to 6 years ago, we do not understand the open data, open science. But recently, lots of the paper, they have the open process, you should open all the data. And so I'm wondering the process, the AR6 is different compared to the old one, or you have new technology. So because sometimes we found the leak version, yeah, it will be a kind of the contrast, a huge contrast between the official reports. Thank you.
Well, probably Details with regard to your questions may be delivered by the panel members later on. I believe our process in AR6 will not change from the process we have taken so far. And so, you know, the selection of authors will be done by the principals of IPCC. I know that's not one of your questions, but also handling of the literature, database, etc., will be exactly the same as before. All right, thank you very much, and I will hand over to you. Right.
Okay, so what we'll have now, as I said before, are three presentations from Dr. Crook, then Kyoto Tanabe and Abdullah Moxit. And then we'll have a panel discussion where we'll invite the other co-chairs and vice chairs of the IPCC who are here in the room, mainly in the front row. They'll come up here and we'll have a panel discussion and take a further round of questions. I expect we may be able to go back to the question of integrated model assessments as well. So I'll give the floor now to Dharma on the special report on global warming.
Okay. Who's projecting? Anna? You're, yeah? Okay, just yeah. Okay, good. I think it's good night. Yes, it's good night. It's a pleasure to have you here. I think that Hoising has some points. I think I might ask here, and I'm that when we start having the questions, we are going to ask the co-chairs to join us. So there are no one more appropriate to respond to the questions than the co-chairs themselves. So I'll be very happy to have them here afterwards to take the questions. So, but I think that it's, before I start with the session, I would like to give some overall sense of how this process so far on the construction of the scope report, which is so eagerly expected, has been built upon. And to me, you know, I have been in the IPCC for a long time. I shouldn't say that, but it's an interesting experience, I would say, to see things evolving, things being sometimes different. I think that it goes very much in line with the last question that was made to Dr. Hoesong. How is the AR6 expected to be a little bit different? And I think that this product specifically, it's going to be the first product of this cycle. So that is an interesting thing. It's going to be the first, and I think it's going to be the fastest. And why is that? Because we got the invitation from the COP in Paris, and the invitation was for the IPCC to produce a special report in 2018. So they did set up the date, which is unusual. Normally they ask us or they invited the IPCC, but without setting up a date. So they did set up a date for this special report. And they are focusing on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and related global greenhouse gas pathways. So that was the invitation from the COP. So last year, about this time. Then in April, the panel, which is the governments, the member states, the representative of the member states, governments, accepted the invitation of the IPCC, but not exactly as it came from the conference of the parties. They said, okay, we accepted the invitation from the COP, but for this special report to be developed in the context of strengthening the global response to the threat of climate change, sustainable development, and efforts to eradicate poverty. So there was some meat added, let's say, in my sense, to the request, the original request. And I think that the scoping of this report is responding accordingly to what the government also put on forward to the invitation that originally came from this body. So After having accepted the invitation, there was a scientific steering committee that was put together, consisting of all the co-chairs from the 3 working groups and the task force on national greenhouse gas inventories. And we also had 2 additional people that came and to fill in a little bit of the social aspects, equity, justice, and so on. So to balance it a little bit more in terms of expertise. That steering committee ultimately had to deliver a draft scoping from the scientific point of view for the appreciation of the panel, the governments again. And they would be the ones to say, well, we are okay with this scope, or we see that some changes could be introduced. So the process was interesting because then the scientific steering committee had this task before them. Then the process initiated to ask nominations from the countries, from observer organizations as well, bureau members. We had almost 600 nominations. From the 600 nominations, initially, so that I don't, initially, we had 50% of these nominations coming from developed countries and 45% coming from developing countries. From these 600, 83 were selected. So you can imagine how the selection process goes on. It's quite complicated from such a large number of nominees from the governments with different expertises on how to choose. So how is the process of choosing, from the 600? Obviously, we start off from the expertise needed. So you have to have scientific, technical, socio-economic expertise. So we have to try to accommodate so that there is no gaps in terms of expertise. So I think this is the first element that we use in the selection of the authors. Obviously, initially, due to budgetary constraints, we know more or less how many people we are going to invite. So it's not out of the blue. Then IPCC procedures have all the elements that we need to take into account. One of them is the geographical balance, so that you are not biased towards, having a number of authors coming from certain regions than others. So we have to also to ensure this geographical balance. And I was happy to see that from these 83 nominees, 51% coming from developing countries. So we had more developing countries participating than the original 600 submissions that we had. And from these, 19% of the 83 were from Africa, 16% from Asia, just to give you a little bit of the scope of participation. So that is the second element that our procedures ask us to look at. Then there is the gender balance, which is one of the most difficult. And it's difficult because also when we receive the nominations from the member states, already that doesn't come as a balanced number. So we received about 27%, and the final number in the selection process raised that number to 32. So we did have a range of people participating from different regions and more women. So that gives you a little bit of the background. So we had the scoping meeting, and that took place I'm getting old, so I have to sometimes to look at my notes. So in August, that took place in August in Geneva. And the scoping process, in my vision, was an interesting one as well. I think that the whole process for this special report is coming out a little bit different. And why did I say that the scoping was different? First, because of the addition that IPCC did to the original invitation, especially in the sustainable development, strengthening the response to the threat of climate change and eradication of poverty, we did have more social scientists political scientists participating in the process. So it was not so much of the physical, the natural scientists, but you have a blend. And this blend was really interesting to see how it interacted. We very commonly see the difficulty that people say of putting together physical and natural scientists from the social scientists. And that was a very interesting blend, and how we managed that so nicely. Well, in my vision, very nicely. The second aspect, also, we are bringing into this process, in the scoping, people that have no experience, previous experience in the IPCC. And that's interesting also, so that you are not, having the same people always into this process. So you're bringing in, as we say, new blood. And that is also an important feature that I think we are strengthening in this AR6. Now, bringing the new blood to a scoping meeting is quite a challenge. Because in a certain way, you could think that these people, because they are not so acquainted with the discussions, they would feel a little bit shy to participate, with people that have so much experience in the process. So we also introduced a way that the breakout groups were so small, about 10 people, let's say each, that really pushed into having everybody participating. So it's slowly building up. If you have a breakout group with non-subject, you would break out in 3 so that everybody had a role and felt, at home and more at easy. So you build up the process. So that was, to me, a novel feature as well. So things, obviously, it's not easy to put together the scope. We had to put the scope, and not only the chapter titles, but we also had to elaborate a little bit on what the scientists thought should be under each one of these chapters. So we called them bullet point, indicative bullet points, right? They also had to choose the title of the report. Mind you, it was the most difficult one because they could not agree. At the end, there was not too much time. And also the length of the chapters. In parallel to this, or before we went to the scoping meeting, there was also an interesting thing that was introduced, which was the questionnaire that was sent to observer organizations. It was sent to the member states, asking them a number of questions, including how they saw the most important elements that they would like to see reflected in the report. So that was also a very nice contribution for us during the scope to bring that expectation from the member states in particular, and also from the observer community. So the process was very rich. So we succeeded. We had this nice draft that was brought to the panel. When did we bring to the panel? It was just very recently. When was it? October the 17th. So we brought this scope, this draft scope that was built from the scientists. And I must confess that, this is a very sensitive report on 1.5, especially when you are having the expectations also to address sustainable development, eradication of poverty, and all these elements. Quite sensitive, quite difficult. We are talking to governments. You are not talking to scientists anymore. The difference is that the scientists have the science vision on how they see this report being built up, also taking into account the literature that is available, the modelings that are out there, how much can we progress. Governments have in mind that they want the report to respond to their expectations to help the process, in particular the political process as well. So that is where we have to put together these two, scientists' vision and also the government expectations on how they see this reporting, meeting their expectations in particular to facilitate the process of discussions, including in the negotiations. So that is also difficult. Surprisingly, and this is why I say this AR6 process is starting with a very good spirit. the governments have a very active role, but let's say they left very much on the hands of the scientists of the scientific steering committee to address their concerns. Very vocal, very vocal. You can imagine this report is of special attention to the small islands in particular. So they are the ones who are pushing very hard. And they were the ones also that pushed also to see more impacts into it and more on pathways. Whereas other countries wanted to have a little bit more of a blend of sustainable development, equity, justice, and so on. So it was not an easy task, but the important thing is that, you know, the governments put on the hands of the scientists the equation to fix it. And instead of in other processes when you have the governments being more active, let's say, in proposing the scoping. So if we look from the scoping that was proposed by the scientists during the scoping meeting and the adopted scoping that came out from the panel, from the governments themselves, we see that there are lots of similarities. They did have some concerns in relation to, in our vision, having participated from the scientific steering committee, a sense of duplication, in particular when sustainable development was mentioned in several of the chapters. So clarification on that, fixing up a little bit on the size of the chapters, in particular to give more, let's say, meeting to the impacts and pathways, but not forgetting the other components, and in particular because sustainable development is going to permeate the other chapters as well. Finally, before I go into the scope itself, originally we had 6 chapters from the scoping meeting, was put, you know, 2 of the chapters, which are now chapter 4 in terms of strengthening and implementing the response to the threat of climate change. So there were 2 separate chapters. Government thought it would be better to put into one single one. So what we are gonna see is also an expectation from the governments that this wouldn't be a very bulky report. They wanted to be concise, straight to the point, and so we are expecting to have something around 230 pages altogether. Obviously, a very big cry for us to bring case studies, to bring regional information as much as possible. So obviously, as I'm going to show in the timeline, we are going to, you know, have to rely on the literature. You know that IPCC relies on existing literature. It doesn't produce literature. So we have a cutoff date that I'm going to indicate. But obviously, we cannot forget that on top of this report, which is going to be the first one to be out, we have 2 other special reports, one on oceans and cryosphere, and the other one on land-related. The title is too big for me to remember, which will also address impacts of the 1.5. And also we have the R6. So we still have, you know, 2, 3 other occasions where this topic is going to be addressed as literature matures, as literature evolves. So don't, you know, be, let's have the highest expectations, 1.5, but it's not going to be the last opportunity for us to address the concerns that have been expressed in terms of impact and pathways. So having said that, the title of the report is what you see there on the screen. We were happy to see that, you know, although the scoping meeting could not agree on the title itself, they agreed that it should be linked to a short one, because other participants wanted to see the whole invitation. So, but we couldn't, you know, do that as a title. So the short title, the nickname of the special report is going to be global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, mind you. And then if we go to the next slide, it shows how we have put together. Who is the, Jasmine? Do I do it? No. Yeah. Okay. No. Well, that's just to bring some Yeah. Mind you, before we go to the next slide, please visit our webpage. So you have all the information, all about the scope, all about background paper, all about process, all about the statistics. So you're gonna see everything there. The outline of the that has been adopted by the government, it's there. I'm not putting too much meat into this. The original scope has bullet points underneath, which are indicative elements just to guide the authors, which are not gonna be absolutely restricted to that, but it's just to give a guidance of the expectations towards the elements that the governments want to see reflected. So just chapter 1 as a framing and context chapter. Nothing new into this. Chapter 2 is on mitigation pathways compatible with 1.5 degrees centigrade. And as I said, in the context of sustainable development, so already sustainable development is here. Chapter 3, it should be 3 there, not 1. Impacts of 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming on natural and human systems. You see that this is going to be the bulkiest chapter that we are going to have with 60 pages. Strengthening and implementing the global response to the threat of climate change. As I said, were 2 chapters from the scientists, now compacted into 1, also bulky with 50 pages. And finally, a last chapter with sustainable development, poverty eradication, and reducing inequalities. And that has up to 20 pages. Beyond that, we are also going to have frequently asked questions, boxes, diagrams. So as I said, the total number of pages expected for this should not exceed 225. So this gives a little bit of the, a broad framework of the report. I think it gives an idea. I thought that it would be too much to bring the bullet points here, but obviously, when questions come, you may ask clarifications on if this or that is going to be addressed or if it's a bullet point or not. So I think that with that, I could move to the next one, which is the timeline. As we said, this has to be delivered by 2018. Don't forget, Dr. Hoesung has already mentioned, call for nominations for authors of this report have been set by December the 18th. So please take note of that specific date. Then the selection process starts. But I would like to point out to 2 specific, not dates, but timings here. Literature to be assessed in this report will need to have been submitted by October 2017 and to be included in the second order draft for review. And also these literature should be assessed by April 2019 to be included in the final draft review. Obviously, for those that have an interest, IPCC does have procedures regarding the use of the literature. So I would call anyone that has an interest to go and look at that. But these are specific dates of literature cut date, as we call it. So all the literature that is ready to be put into this report will have to follow these 2 specific moments that I have indicated here, which are October 2017 and April 2018. And I think that with that, I gave you, I wouldn't say brief, but I think that I have clarified a little bit. I thought it would be important, in particular for the questions that have arose about, the differences in the AR6 that I personally, I think that are very visible. So thank you very much for your attention, and questions will come then after the other presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thelma. And as you said, we'll take questions after the other presentations. So Kyoto Tanabe, co-chair of the Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, will now present the update.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me try to be brief. In addition to 3 special reports and also AR6, IPCC embarks on production of a new methodology report to refine the current 2006 IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. And that will be called 2019 refinement to the 2006 IPCC guidelines, because that will be completed in May 2019. The aim of that methodology report is to provide an updated and sound scientific basis for supporting the preparation and continuous improvement of national greenhouse gas inventories, which I hope will eventually contribute to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And also, it aims not to revise the 2006 IPCC guidelines, but update, supplement, and/or elaborate the existing guidance in the 2006 IPCC guidelines, where gaps or out-of-date science have been identified. And the format and structure will be the same as the 2006 IPCC guidelines, so as to make it easier for inventory compilers to use the new report in conjunction with the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Author nomination by governments and international organizations is now underway until 9th of December. And authors will be selected by Task Force Bureau by the end of February next year. The first lead author meetings will be held in June 2017, next year. And after that, 3 review stages are planned in accordance with the IPCC procedures. As a first review, expert review of first order draft will take place December next year to January 2018. The second review, a government expert review of the second order draft, will take place from July to August 2018. And the final review, government review of final draft, will take place at the beginning of 2019. As the scope and outline of this report was carefully considered at the scoping meeting in August this year, that was preceded by 4 expert meetings. So the scope and outline of this report was very carefully considered by many inventory experts. And the final scope and outline approved by the IPCC last month are included in decision IPCC 44.5 that is available from the IPCC website. And last week, on Monday, we held a side event on specifically on this report. And the several presentation slides are available at the IPCC website. So you may wish to visit IPCC website to download them and to read it. Again, this report will be completed in 2019. That is well in advance of the first global stocktake in 2023. So we expect that the parties to the UNFCCC will have sufficient time to consider this new report, so that they can use this report before the first global stocktake. That's all. Thank you very much.
He had a whole day the other day to present. This is why he was short.
Thank you very much, Kyoto. So that's 2 dates for your diary. The call for nominations for the methodology report closes on the 9th of December, and the call for nominations for authors for 1.5 degrees is 11th of December. And now Abdullah Moksvit will tell us about some of the other things that are going on over the next few years in support of the production of these and our other reports.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think Jonathan did well because he introduced this presentation, because I see in the room many young scientist and newcomer, and it was very useful to explain what is the process of IPCC before going to details about the special report. And also I can say that the presentation from Telma was likely brief. The one from Kyoto, very likely brief, but the mine will be extremely likely brief. So now I have for my presentation 3 objectives. The first one is to give you the information about IPCC. The second one is to improve the possibility for you to participate to IPCC work. And the third, also to make it very interesting, even from you can, disseminate information in your country to invite more new scientists to be involved in the process. And this is, if I can succeed in this task, I will be really happy. Here, I presented a sort of history of IPCC, because from 1970 to 1980, there was a start of new science about climate change, and also some awareness about climate issue. And in 1988, WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, and the United Nations Environment Program decided to establish the IPCC with the mandate to make assessment of science in order to inform decision makers. And this is very, very important, to inform the decision maker in sort of conversion of scientific information to what is used as decision making for a stakeholder decision maker. And from that time, IPCC was preparing many reports. From 1990, it was the first assessment report. But to let you know that this report, even at this level of research, it was a good input for the establishment for United Nations Framework for Climate Change, the one for which we have this COP22. Second report, 1995, it was a report, assessment report that was used to establish, to inform the Kyoto Protocol. The third assessment report was the one who introduced this issue about adaptation and vulnerability about climate change. The fourth assessment report was the report that introduced this relationship between temperature and mainly these 2 degrees, and also what are the impacts, and also this was to inform negotiator under the UNFCCC. The fifth assessment report was the good input for Paris Agreement. I think thanks to this fifth assessment report, that the government, when we reach this very likely information, they were participating seriously to come with this Paris Agreement, and it was a good introduction for this Paris Agreement. But Telma just presented the way forward, this special report about 1.5, and we will have also the mandate to inform this 2019 global stocktake, and later at the end of the sixth assessment report, we will inform the global stocktake that will come to 2023. That means all these assessments are useful to inform the negotiation, but not only negotiation, but also to give a good informal report that should be workable for stakeholders in order to convert scientific information to decision making, to action plan in order to tackle climate change. Yes, what is now next about IPCC? I think this is, I talk about what are the structure and this timely, strategic plan. But as you have seen, the awareness was increasing and everything was there. But as far as we have good research, as far as we have involvement from scientists from all around the world, from developing country, many composition, science, social disciplines, political policy, and everything. This can increase this information that can be assessed by IPCC. And this is why the main task that we have now is how we can develop and how we can improve the participation from developing countries. And just, we have statistics, but that can give you from cycle to cycle, we have increasing the participation from developing country. And you from developing country who are participating here, please do your best to be involved yourself, and also invite the people from your country to be involved in the process. But to be involved in the process, it is not only as a researcher, but you can also participate in this research. You can also, as a reviewer, you can be an expert reviewer. To be expert reviewer, just you should declare yourself, I am expert reviewer, and we can be, participating to IPCC work. And also, through you, we can have good studies at your national level. And if these studies are converted in peer-reviewed paper, it can be automatically introduced in the assessment. And by this, you can participate in the IPCC work. This is something where IPCC is trying to improve and to make the necessary action, to take the necessary action to this involvement by helping this young scientists, introducing through this scholarship program to have new scientists, also to try to make a good translation of this gray literature to be converted in English peer-reviewed, and this can improve the participation from developing country. Of course, one mean that can help in a great manner is the communication. And IPCC just in the last plenary approved his communication strategy. And through this communication strategy, what are we willing to do is to disseminate as broad as possible this communication. By having many outreaches all around the world, we can inform about IPCC, we can interest those people in those countries without making any differentiation from students, from young children. And here in Morocco, you have the good experience, even in this train of climate change. We have some tasks dedicated to children, and also for other communities, civil society, politicians, and others. And you see here, it is not, we have not all the picture, but the dots there give an idea how the activity communication strategy is there. But my invitation for those countries who didn't see themselves in this map, please approach the secretariats in order to organize in your country one workshop, one outreach event in your country, and by this we can improve the visibility of IPCC, and also as a result we can involve many people from your country in the process. So with this, also I can finish by also to involve young scientists. It is not only issue about communication and involvement, but also about making information available. And now we are thinking about the possibility to create a sort of library that can be accessed easily by all the scientists. They should be only connected to IPCC, to climate change studies, and also they should access to all the information that allows them to participate in efficient manner in the IPCC work. And also, what is very important, IPCC is offering many possibilities for you to be informed. There is a website. Please go to and visit this website. You have all the information, as Telma said, and also Kayus said, all the critical information are there. Please make a visit to our website. Be interested, and we are offering to you the possibility. We are opening our door to you to be involved in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdallah. Now I'd like to invite the co-chairs and vice chairs who are here to come and join the podium, and we'll take your questions for the remainder of the event.
Yeah, it told us to stay, so we stay.
Okay, so just very quickly running, starting from the far end, we have Eduardo Calvo, like Kyoto, a co-chair of the Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, then Kyoto Tanabe, you just heard from, Valerie Masson-Delmotte, who's a co-chair of Working Group 1, which deals with the physical science basis of climate change. Next to her, Jim Ski, who is one of the co-chairs of Working Group 3, which deals with the mitigation of climate change. Then Thelma, who you've already heard from, Abdallah, you've already heard from, Priyadashi Shukla, who is a colleague of Jim Ski, another co-chair of Working Group 3, Deborah Roberts, who's a co-chair of Working Group 2, which deals with impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, and her colleague Hans Otto Partner, the other co-chair of Working Group 2, and then Co Barrett, who, like Thelma, is one of the vice chairs of the IPCC. So we'd be happy to take your questions for the next 20 minutes or so. If you have them, please identify yourself, etc. And if they're for the panel in general or for one of them in particular, please say. So there's a gentleman with a green lanyard in the middle there. Hope the microphones work.
Does it work? Yes. Thanks for the presentations, and it's amazing to see such a high-powered lineup across there. So the question's to Thelma. It's on, you gave the outline of the 1.5 degree, the scoping, the outline of the report, and the chapter 3 impacts of 1.5 degree warming on natural and human systems. Does this include impacts of the mitigation responses themselves? So that was the question. And sorry, it's Steve Cornelius from WWF.
We'll take the questions one at a time.
Who wants to respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kick off. They said you kick off. So I'll kick off, and I say yes. To be short, because I have been quite extensive, but I would also like to see if anyone wants to elaborate on my response, because we are also looking at opportunities, challenges, barriers to all these elements that the questions of opportunities and challenges have been recurrent in all the chapters. So it's going to be an interesting way to bring the blend and balance between these elements in terms of mitigation and adaptation and impact. Who wants to, Jim, you do? Okay.
Yeah, I'll take that one as well, because obviously there are elements of that that also may appear in the chapter 5 on sustainable development issues. But maybe I can take the chance to say one other thing that was agreed at the last plenary in Bangkok, that Working Group 3 was very keen to explore the issues of the sustainable development aspects of mitigation responses. And we have proposed successfully to run an expert meeting, which is called, if I remember correctly, Mitigation, Sustainability and Climate Stabilization Scenarios, where we will explore how these issues may be addressed more fully right across the AR6 cycle. So the spirit behind your question is very much being taken into account, but it's not just the 1.5 report, it's across the whole cycle.
Thanks. Anyone else on the podium on that one? Valerie?
Yes, if you go on the IPCC website, you can find a more detailed outline with a number of bullet points for each chapter, and this one is clearly stated.
Thanks. Any question there in the second row?
Jean-Luc Rodeau, French Water Partnership. I think that with IPCC, we have a good picture of global situation of climate change. But for example, in our sector of water, we need always local assessment on watershed or on the groundwater system. This is important because I think you should give counsel in order to get tomorrow local assessment. For example, we had a study we produced recently that said that in Africa, the collection of hydrological data, which was important in the years 1980, today has been reduced and is today to the state of the year 1900. So there is we cannot have a good management of the water system if we have not a good collection of hydrological data, of data on the use of water. And I think it's important because we cannot support our system only with meteorological system. I think it should be an important task of IPCC and to go in the quality and the collection of other data than meteorological data.
Thank you. Any comments from working groups 1 or 2 or 3?
Which is very well taken, but I think even in the previous rounds of the IPCC reports, and especially in this round, we have a specific a kind of mandate to start looking at from the bottom-up literature. And so a lot of bottom-up literature which is emerging from the local to the regional levels and global. So I mean, this particular concern that IPCC reports are looking a lot of top-down. I mean, that to an extent it could remain. However, we are, as far as possible, actually trying to supplement the material with a lot of bottom-up material. Now, there are like the issues of generalization and specificity as such. So broadly, the reports of the IPCC at the aggregate or the macro level are more providing a kind of very high-level messages. But at the same time, there is a lot of those high-level messages also are supported by a great deal of the underlying regional or local literature as such. And well, the point is well taken actually that one of the great, one of the things that we are trying to do specifically this time is that how to assess the literature which also comes, let's say, from the countries which are not using necessarily English or something that, and the literature, especially from developing countries, which could be coming and originating actually that from the local languages or the local sources. And that's why one might find a reflection of that in the 1.5 report outline, which Thelma had presented, that towards the very end, we may come with some case studies to supplement this information. Now, the case studies was not generally considered to be in the IPCC reports as some kind of a major supportive literature, but in this case, we are focusing wherever possible to bring the bottom-up aspects more and more into the report as such. But finally, we do depend upon the literature as it exists and the kind of broad level questions which are posed to us. So this is the kind of general reply that I would give.
Yeah, Deborah.
Dr. Lee indicated that one of the interventions in this assessment cycle will be an international conference on cities and climate change. And I think that's one of the first clear indications of this increasing vertical integration of international, national, and local science. And the intent of that process is to put in place a new international research agenda to look at those local impacts in terms of vulnerability, adaptation, and mitigation opportunities in order to spur the research that will be necessary for the special report on cities. So I think we're beginning to see that process of beginning to localize the focus. And I think one of the clearest indications of that is the cities conference.
Thanks. Valerie?
I just would like to add one word about your statement about the need to sustain and improve observing systems. We also had a side event last Monday about urgencies in fundamental climate research and, of course, observations where repeatedly said to be at the heart of the start of any assessment or process-based understanding or improvement of models.
Thanks. German Watch.
Thank you very much. Manfred Reber, German Watch. I have a question to Thelma, and I want to go one step further after you have adopted the special report on 1.5. And I wonder myself, what is the best way, how did the good results of this special report arrive at with IPCC at COP24, 3 months later? That's a crucial question. And we want to translate that somehow to the politicians. And we have an excellent president. For me, that was the structured expert dialogue in the first periodical review. And we know Paris has also decided a second periodical review. And that's why I would suggest we should have in October an extra session of this second periodical review, or maybe, of course, there will be a structured expert dialogue. And through this October session in 2018, they could digest the results of the special report and then bring this to COP24. Thank you. What do you think on that?
We think that your suggestion is in alignment with what it is expected from this report, I would say, to bring as much information as possible to feed into the process. So I think that your suggestion will be considered. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on that? I mean, the 2018 COP24 is the facilitative dialogue, so there's already a kind of structure for that to. So there was a lady in the fourth row.
Thank you. My name is Yael Cohen-Paran, and I'm a parliament member from Israel. And maybe I will bring a little bit different perspective to this discussion. And I'm not a usual politician. I'm coming from working on environmental issues for the last 20 years, but so I'm not typical. But Thelma, you presented very nicely in the beginning the process of choosing all the groups and having a more not just a scientific, physical scientist, but also social scientist integrated into your work. And my question is about where are you thinking about integrating the political scientists? And I think, of course, IPCC has done a great job in the last 20 years for bringing this issue up in generally. But what can I say? Now we have a new president-elect that is denying the existence of this very panel and its outcomes. So where is the political science? And I think if you get, you have the resources, you have the possibility to really go into deep in research on political acceptance of the issue. And I think you'll come with interesting findings that could change a lot. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As I said, I think that this special report being a blend or being an integration between the three working groups, it will have to bring a blend of very different people. Not that social scientists have not been engaged before, but that they are more prominent, let's say, in terms of participation in working group 2 and 3. But this time we are going to have to bring much more of this blend into this report. Obviously, we have also to bear in mind that this report is the 1.5. So the literature assessment that we are going to do, most likely will have to be in line with the association between the literature and the 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming. So that's another feature that I think we will have to see how much literature is going to be out there in this respect. Jim, I think you want to say something. So anyway, obviously we are going to go through all the process of having that blend of expertise that we will need to fulfill the chapters as they have been outlined. And this will include economists, this will include, as I said, a blend of scientists from different areas, and most likely political ones as well. But Jim.
Yeah, just to say, there was a place for political science in AR5. It was in chapters 13, 14 and 15 that covered policy making and the international climate regime. But it is a tricky issue, which is why the Norwegian Research Council organized a 2-day workshop a few weeks ago on how political scientists could participate in IPCC. And it was a very complicated discussion, but let me just take 2 thoughts out of it, which are not necessarily my personal thoughts, but that came out of the meeting. And one is the kind of the conflict of interest that policymakers potentially have for this. Because when you do political science research, the policymakers are the subject. And then IPCC assesses the research. And then that has to be approved by the same policymakers who were the subject of the research in the first place. And that kind of conundrum was something that was discussed. And we didn't get to the answers on that, but it was an issue that certainly came up there. And I think the other thing the political scientists themselves asked as a community, whether IPCC was the right avenue for their research once it was conducted, or where there were other ways in which that research would influence society. So again, I'm reporting the output of a workshop, but these are the kind of tricky issues you certainly arrive at.
Hans?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what you are asking is also relating to some basic features of the human nature. And in Working Group 2, we are also concerned with these questions in terms of addressing the background of recognizing the changes, recognizing the impacts, and also addressing the adaptation measures that need to be taken. And there is a societal inertia to be recognized at various levels. And you may take the recent election as an example of that. And the issue here is really to address the basis, the psychological basis and anthropological basis of decision making. And this is an issue that we also have an eye on.
Thanks. Anyone else on this? Valerie?
It is just to complement that with a Working Group 1 perspective. In the scoping of the main assessment report, one interesting expertise area for which we call experts is perception of climate change, with the idea that we need to compare facts, detected trends, attributed trends to public perception as also a way to understand which climate information is perceived or not, where it is affecting human and natural systems.
Thanks. There's a question about 2/3. Yeah, there.
Hello, my name is Kees van der Geest. I'm at United Nations University. So a topic that emerged quite strongly over the past few years is loss and damage. And I think it came a bit too soon for AR5. There was not yet a peer-reviewed literature about it that was substantial enough. But now that literature is expanding fast. So I was wondering whether for AR6 there are plans to integrate loss and damage more systematically.
Yeah, thank you very much for this rather difficult question. From a scientific point of view, we talk about impacts, and certainly these impacts have a loss and damage aspect to it, which is currently discussed and evaluated in the UNFCCC. So I think these are two sides of the same coin, and this will be part of the scientific literature that will be assessed in the Working Group 2 report and will be included. The shaping of this and the scoping of this still needs to be done, but we certainly keep that issue in mind.
Valerie?
Of course, much of that will depend on the scoping of the main assessment report, but it's clear that because there was the SREX report on extreme events, there was only a brief coverage of that in the Working Group 1 AR5, and based on the new knowledge that is emerging about the attribution of extreme events, this might be an important part of the assessment of Working Group 1 as a contribution from the physical science basis on the debate on loss and damage.
Thanks. Question there in the fifth row.
Hello, my name is Brian Bennett. I'm a research assistant at the University of Maryland. My group has developed an empirical model of global climate that's been largely inspired by the works of Lean and Rind. My question is on the upcoming special report and the 1.5 degree pathway. The consensus amongst the climate modeling community seems to be that this is RCP 2.6. And I'd like to mention that in chapter 11 of the 2013 IPCC, you see that the models struggle to replicate the observed temperature record. So I want to know if there's been any improvement in the upcoming special report on the models that go into it, capturing the record, and if they have improved, does that change the 1.5 degree pathway?
That's a broad question. What I can just say is that there's a lot of emerging literature on the issue of 1.5 degree global warming, how the existing RCP scenarios and CEMIP 5 simulations can be used for the discussion on stabilization to 1.5 degree warming. Also because of the limited information available from RCP 2.6 ensemble members. So there's literature being developed. There are new research initiatives at the moment. And given the deadline for new publications to be considered, new work should be available to complement the AR5 available information on that purpose. There are also new developments on the side of the carbon cycle climate feedbacks, especially when there is a reduced rate of emissions, and correctly assessing the processes at play within the climate carbon cycle into play. So new research is being produced and will be available for the assessment.
Anyone else on that? I think there's another question over there.
Thank you. Again, my name is Don Brown. I'm with Widener University Law School. I'm a great fan of IPCC, but I'm also a great critic of Working Group 3 over several years. And I'll be quite blunt about it. It was controlled by the economists, in my view, and a lot of it in that, and therefore the fifth assessment was a big improvement, but it had a chapter on ethics and on equity. And the chapter on ethics said some really important things which are not controversial from an ethical point of view, such as economics doesn't deal with distributive justice, that there's only several kinds of the chapter on equity said some really good things. But if you read the rest of Working Group 3, those thoughts did not make it through. So one of the challenges, and it's not a criticism, I think it's a challenge for IPCC, is to take the insights about ethics and justice and make sure the rest of the chapter doesn't encourage people to take economics into account as a motivating factor. So I think it's an integration problem in Working Group 3 now that you've started to seriously take these issues on.
Yeah, thank you. Just to say, when you asked your earlier question to Hu Esung, I was itching to answer. I was itching to answer when you asked an earlier question to Hu Esung. I mean, it's just to say, I mean, could I say on my CV, I was director of the UK Economic and Social Research Council's Global Environmental Change Programme, and I chaired the Association of Research Centres in Social Sciences. So I am deeply sympathetic to getting disciplines other than economics into the Working Group 3 report. And it's up, the scoping will be done by a wide variety of people, but certainly that's the way I would like to nudge it. But I think we need to be quite grown up about the way that social sciences come into it. And certainly a few of these workshops I've been going to over the last few months with social scientists, many social scientists feel quite suspicious of IPCC and feel a reluctance to get involved. And one of the things that we need to clearly do when we're scoping out reports is to remember that when we produce bullet points and chapter titles, we're not just giving a signal to policymakers about what the report will cover. We're also planting a flag in the ground that says to certain scientific communities, you're welcome within IPCC and your insights and your literature are going to be assessed. Because I'm certainly aware of relevant scientific literature in the social sciences and elsewhere that was not adequately assessed in the previous assessment cycles, in my view. So I'm sympathetic. I think there's some tricky issues around the word ethics, which is a toxic word around IPCC, and we need to think very carefully about how we approach that set of issues. But perhaps we could take that one offline.
Well, I think the questions of justice and ethics, well, these are not only theoretical questions, but very much of a practical questions. Now, there's one thing is that if you can look at and the chapters that you mentioned in the last report, well, these are like the concepts are more of framing concepts. So how do you frame the entire report as such? But the other part is not only the framing part, the really important part, especially when I look at from the developing country side, is the practical aspect of the justice and ethics. But it's not actually that well the theories of justice, whether they are prevailing over the world or not, or something. But in these particular questions which are connected with the climate change, now as you could see that actually that increasingly that one is bringing the aspects of justice and ethics, etc., through various other mechanisms. For example, when you say in 1.5 that in the context of the sustainable development, now you look at the sustainable development goals, a huge part of justice, ethics, etc., are already included within that. The very specific issue of the poverty eradication, as mentioned that. Now, in general, actually, when we talk about the issues of justice, man, it looks very enchanting. But really, when you come down to that how does this meet with the poverty eradication, etc.? So that is one a quick answer that I could give. The second point that I would have is that actually that well, as we more and more see that actually literature is also trying to align a great deal between this the emerging debates on sustainable development, climate change, and the other aspects which are coming from businesses and many other places. So within that context, the emerging literature, whatever it's kind of providing, I mean, I would say that the IPCC reports are giving justice to that. But however, probably there will still be some scope which could remain. And well, I think that we are aware of that, and I think more such questions would keep us on the alert on that. So thanks for that question.
Again, I think Thelma gave us a very clear outline of how the 1.5 report, I think, sets us on a new path for the 6th assessment cycle. And she referred to the fact that there were many bullet points under the headings she presented. And when I look at those, integration that you're calling for is there. I see scattered across these chapters, both references to regional impacts, trade-offs, distributional impacts. And I think given the political significance of the 1.5 report, it's setting up a new arc of debate, a new storyline. I think that will be significant and probably follow through into AR6. Again, I think you're going to see, as Jim has indicated, that this will constantly be built out in this assessment cycle.
Thank you. Well, our time is really out. But before we're kicked out, I just wanted to ask Jim and any of the others who wanted to answer, is 1.5 going to look at the question of feasibility?
Thank you very much for that one, Jonathan. I mean, the word feasibility does not appear in the homework question that's set to us by UNFCCC. But when you get to meetings like this and a journalist asks you a question, it's one of the most common words to come up. And the problem is feasibility has many, many different dimensions. It could be, is it possible within the laws of chemistry and physics? It could be, is it compatible with the kind of feasible scale up and the rate of pace at which new technologies are developed, or indeed it could be political feasibility. And so I think to approach that question scientifically, as opposed into a soundbite sense, you really need to break it into parts and say, what are the conditions under which a 1.5 pathway could come about? And there will be dimensions there about, the climate modeling side of it, the chemistry and physics, and there will be dimensions about the scale of the change that's required in infrastructure and society and the pace of that change. So we need to deconstruct that question and answer it scientifically. That is going to be the key element for it, I think.
Thanks. Anyone else on that, Valerie?
Maybe a complementary approach would be to speak about commitment. And I think there will be a need also to assess the committed response of the climate system to existing drivers and to existing infrastructures, which is looking at this issue from the other side and the complementary perspective.
Okay. Anyone else? Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for staying with us so late. We've enjoyed your questions and look forward to seeing you again soon.